Rolling Hills Estates was my haven. For 7 years, I had enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of our suburban neighborhood neighbors, waving as they received their morning papers. Children scooting bikes along the curved streets and weekend barbecues that filled the air with the scent of grilled burgers and laughter. Our homeowners association had enforced strict but reasonable rules that preserved property values as well as neighborly happiness. My corner house with its neatly trimmed grass and generous driveway had been my joy and pride since the day I had signed on the dotted line of the mortgage papers. Everything was turned around on a sunny spring Saturday afternoon in April, when a moving truck pulled up to the vacant house next door. I was at my kitchen window and watched as workers offloaded modern-looking furniture, abstract art pieces, and what appeared to be a whole bunch of wine. The new owner supervised the process with commanding presence woman in her 40s, with expensive highlights, oversized designer glasses, and a voice that could travel across 3 homes. When she yelled into her phone, I introduced myself that afternoon, delivering a basket of treats from local bakeries as a welcoming present. "I am Robert, your next-door neighbor," I said, shaking her hand. She stared at it for a little too long before weakly shaking it. "Karen Westfield," she announced with barely an eyes meeting as she regarded my gift with apparent distaste. "How quaint, thank you." The basket disappeared into her house, and so did she, without so much as asking me in or saying something about the neighborhood 2 weeks Karen had established herself a force to be reckoned with, her residence being what seemed like an extension of continuous entertainment complex. Thursday cocktail parties spilled into midnight Friday nights. Partying spilled over into Saturday morning's breakfast's noise level exceeded our HOA guidelines. But I initially chose tolerance over confrontation. It was her song selections that ground me down, especially the same popular playlist, played repeatedly and again, as if maybe variety would detract from her. Staying the parking scenario bloomed quickly from inconvenient to fury-provoking. Provoking her guests, who arrived in luxury vehicles and parked with entitled impunity, who inserted mailboxes, clogged corners, and increasingly overran my land beer cans and cocktail glasses, occasionally materialized on my lawn the morning after her parties, as though my land was part of her party domain. The first time, a black Mercedes glinted its way half down my driveway and prevented me from pulling in properly. After returning from shopping, I figured a nice chat was called for. I waited until the party had weakened prior to rapping on her door. "Karen, I must speak with you regarding the parking problem." I began, continuing my tone, nice but firm. "Your visitors are making it increasingly difficult for me to access my own driveway." She leaned up against her doorway, martini held in hand. "Indeed, I do not see the problem. There's room for everybody." She gestured vaguely toward the street. "In point of fact, there is not. The black Mercedes is blocking my entry. I would appreciate it if you would remind your visitors to be respectful in the future." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed for an instant. "Listen, Robert, we're all neighbors here. A little flexibility goes a long way toward building community. Maybe you're being too starchy." She spoke the last word as she might be issuing a diagnosis about a personality disorder. I held my ground. "It is not flexibility. It is respecting property lines." "I will say something to my guests," she said, disdainfully. "But honestly, it seems like such a small thing to be upset about with that." She closed the door before I could talk. Going back to my house, I saw Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, watching the transaction from her porch. She nodded sympathetically to me later that same week. When she was collecting my mail, she came over struggling with the new neighbor, she asked quietly. "Just a miscommunication about parking," I said, not wanting to fuel neighborhood rumor. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "That woman has complained to the HOA on 3 different families for landscape infractions, been around less than a month, and already trying to claim the location." As I walked home, I could feel the tenuous peace of our community tipping. Something told me this was only the beginning, but I was still determined to maintain the peace. Some battles aren't worth fighting, I told myself sadly. Karen had already made her declaration of war. I just did not know it yet. Over the next 3 months, Karen's hilarious schedule ramped up as if she were vying for Socialite of the Year award. What had begun as weekend parties evolved into near-daily ones. Monday wine tastings, Wednesday poker nights, Friday cocktail hours, extending far into Saturday morning. The noise ordinance infractions mounted, but the HOA seemed averse to diligently enforcing them later on. I would discover that the HOA president was one of her regulars at her VIP soirees. The parking situation had worsened from annoying to outrageous visitors. Now permanently occupied my driveway, completely forcing me to park on the street and walk to my own front door. The first time it happened, I called Karen's door and waited 15 minutes before a young man holding a martini opened it. "Can you get the owner of the red Audi? It is taking over my driveway completely." Explained, "Oh yeah, maybe that's Jen's car. I will remind her when she finishes in the bathroom," he said, shutting the door before I could emphasize the urgency. 45 minutes later, the car was still unmoved. I returned to Karen's house, where music this time had got louder. Karen herself answered firmly, upset at being interrupted. "What do you want, Robert? The red Audi is still blocking my drive." "I need it moved immediately," she huffed dramatically. Jennifer is in the midst of telling the most interesting tale about her vacation in Bali. "Can you spare us 30 minutes? Surely you're not going at this moment." My patience dissipated. "That is not the issue. It is my drive, and I must have access to it at all." Well, she snapped. "I will cut her off." She slammed the door shut. The car rolled 20 minutes later. The driver scowling at me as if I had done some huge social wrong in asking permission to drive onto my own property. After dozens of similar incidents, I began leaving notes on windshields. "Please do not block driveway. This is private property." The notes were ignored, frequently crumpled up and discarded onto my yard. Following my finding of one drifting within my bird feeder, I started capturing each violation, capturing photos of autos, taking down timings, and keeping an all-inclusive record of incidences. My kitchen countertop came to serve as a depot of evidence, with records sorting the multiplying documentation of contempt at one particularly hectic event. I heard Karen on her patio, wine glass in hand, entertaining her guests with stories about me. "The driveway cop is at it again," she announced to amused chuckles. "Left another note today for real. Some people retire to the suburbs because they have better things to do than police." 10 feet of concrete, her guests burst out laughing. "Perhaps he needs an invitation," someone joked. "Trust me, that would ruin the atmosphere," Karen joked. More laughter was succeeded by derision, sliced deeper than I wished to admit. I had prided myself on being a reasonable neighbor, an individual who valued community harmony over personal inconveniences. Now I was being portrayed as the neighborhood nuisance for merely standing up for my property rights. The scandal reached rock bottom when a silver BMW blocked my driveway one Tuesday morning as I prepared to head out the door for a crucial client meeting. I found the driver inside Karen's house, engaged in what appeared to be a breakfast party. "Excuse me, but you will have to take your car out right away." "I have a very important meeting to get to," I had explained, trying to remain sane. The man in his mid-50s with an expensive watch glistening in the morning light sized me up. "Let me just finish my coffee," he snapped curtly. "No, I have to leave now. Your car is parked at my property." His face grew darkened. "Listen, friend, do not twist your panties," I said. "I will relocate it when I am done." "It has to be relocated now," I insisted, feeling my professionalism slipping away. "Who are you to think you are?" he snapped. Standing up from the driveway dictator. "Karen warned us about you." Karen stood beside him, his face a mix of amusement and irritation. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there is a problem. Your guests always clog up my driveway. And now I am going to be late for a client meeting." Karen placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Richard, would you mind moving your car for our neighbor? He is really upset this morning." The condescending tone in her voice made me have high blood pressure, but I remained silent as Richard moved his car inch by inch, making a show of how frustrated he was. Subsequent week, I called our HOA representative about the ongoing issues. "I understand you are upset," she told me, "but these are neighbor-to-neighbor problems that are beyond our direct enforcement." "Have you tried to reason with her?" I left the meeting feeling like a loser. The message was loud and clear. I was alone in this battle against entitled overreach. Autumn came around and brought cooler temperatures, but no relief from Karen's disrupting behavior. If anything, her entitlement had increased with each unenforced transgression. My documentation folder had grown so thick that I needed to purchase an additional storage box just to store the proof of her flirtations. On the first Saturday of October, invitations with a glossy surface appeared in special mailboxes around the block, but curiously not mine. Karen was having what she described as a Hollywood Nights gala, in celebration of having been promoted in the office. Neighbors buzzed with news about it at the neighborhood mailboxes, some showing off their invitation and shooting me guilty glances. I overheard Margaret from 3 doors down point out that Karen had hired professional bartenders and a valet service for the party. A valet service in the suburbs was too much. But I was actually glad maybe professional valet would be more considerate of property lines than her friends had. This hopeful expectation was shattered when I returned home from running errands that evening. My entire driveway, not just the entrance but the entire concrete space, was crowded with cars. I didn't know a young man in a cheap black vest standing on my boundary. a valet ticket book in his hand. 3 luxury cars parked in tidy row on my private property. I stopped at the curb and approached him, disbelief soon giving way to get me angry. "Excuse me, but automobiles cannot be parked in my driveway. This is private property." The valet, who was barely 20 years old, seemed lost. "Sister Miss Westfield instructed us to park here for overflow parking. She said it would be all right." "She instructed you to park in my driveway without asking permission." My voice grew louder, despite my efforts to remain calm. "She said the neighbor would not complain." He replied, looking increasingly more awkward. "She answered, you two have a deal." "There is no deal," I stated firmly. "These cars need to be taken out immediately." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I cannot take them out without the keys of the owners. They are all inside at the party." "Go inside and bring the owners out," I demanded. "I am not capable of leaving my stall," he answered. "But my boss will come back shortly." I decided to do it myself, had 2 of her own feet, and marched right up to Karen's residence. The front door stood open, with formally dressed guests milling indoors, and outdoors music pulsed from speakers positioned around her grounds. Spotlights beamed on her residence as though it were really a Hollywood premiere and not a suburban bash. I spotted Karen in her living room, holding court in a sequined dress, champagne flute in hand. "Karen, I have to speak with you immediately." I broke in, interrupting her conversation with 2 men in new tuxedos. She smiled, pausing for a fraction of a second. "Robert, crashing my party? How unexpected. Your valet service has filled my driveway with guests. Cars, I never gave permission for this. They need to be moved now." Karen laughed softly, laying her hand on my arm as if we were sharing a joke. "Do not be such a spoil sport. It is only for the evening." "Where is your community spirit?" I removed her hand from my arm. "This has nothing to do with community spirit. You have instructed your valet to employ my private property without permission. That is trespassing." Her face fixed in a firm expression. "Lower your voice. You're making a scene at my party." "I don't care about your party. I care about my property rights, which you are still infringing. Either those vehicles are relocated within 15 minutes, or I am contacting the HOA emergency number and the police." The surrounding guests had grown quiet, observing our standoff with uneasy interest. Karen's face reddened in shame that quickly turned to anger. "Are you threatening me?" she yelled loudly. "I am stating facts. Those cars will be taken away, or I will take legal action." The tone of Karen rose. "Get out of my house. How could you threaten me and my guests?" I began leaving, pulling out my phone to call the HOA emergency number behind me. There was Karen yelling loudly. "Can you believe that guy? He just threatened me and my guests. I don't feel safe." 10 minutes later, after leaving a message on the HOA emergency line, I was still waiting for cars to be moved when 2 police vehicles pulled up in front of our homes, lights flashing. Karen quickly approached them, gesturing toward me with dramatic distress. I stood in amazement watching as she acted like a victim, tears now running down her face as I spoke with the officers. One of them approached me, expression stern. "Sir, we had a report of threats to the homeowner and her guests. May I see your ID? Please, in that instant, standing outside my own home, being treated as a criminal, as my property rights were not merely violated but paraded." Something inside me shifted irrevocably. This was no longer parking. This was about justice. The police incident was a turning point. After viewing my property survey and the security camera footage I installed months prior, the officers decided that no crime had been done on my account. They told the valet to remove the cars off my driveway, but charged no one on anyone regardless the damage to my reputation had been done. Neighbors who viewed the police lights and Karen's performance now glanced at me with suspicion as I collected my letters or tended in my garden the following day. Following the party debacle, I sought an appointment with Patricia Lawson, attorney, who handled property disputes and HOA regulations. Her office, plain and utilitarian, reflected herself. "No nonsense. So your neighbor has been letting guests park in your property against your will. And when you raised the issue, she called the police claiming that you put herself in jeopardy." Patricia summary reading my reports. "With impressed attention, you have been careful in keeping records that will be of great assistance. What are my options?" I inquired of her. She responded, setting aside her reading glasses. "First, you need to fully grasp the HOA bylaws relating to parking and property lines. Numerous homeowners never even read these documents thoroughly." She informed me that within our HOA regulations, directing others to park on private property without clear permission was a most serious crime, with large fines. Aside from falsely reporting to the HOA, or police may have extra charges, your first response should be strengthening security systems and marking your property boundaries. Unambiguously clearly, she advised during the upcoming weekend. I installed additional security cameras with superior night vision and superior angles. I installed private property. No trespassing signs across the entrance to my driveway, making certain they were HOA compliant, but clearly signifying my property space. I also painted new line demarcations across the side of my driveway where it bordered the street utilizing HOA-approved products. Karen noticed my improvements immediately as I realigned the scope of one camera. She approached her property line. "Quite the surveillance state you are building," she yelled, "thinking of producing your own reality show." I continued working without paying attention to her comment. "The Neighborhood Watch Committee might not approve of all these cameras," she continued. "They could be seen as privacy intrusive." I did turn around to greet her. "The cameras are only directed at my property, which I have every right to monitor the HOA rules. Permit security systems for individual protection." Her smile was glued. "I hear that you've been phoning me Karen to other neighbors. How absurd to call a person by name as an insult. Your name is Karen." I said nothing more, nothing less. "Nothing else." Her eyes opened wide. "You should be cautious about gossip. Defamation is against the law. So is trespassing and providing false reports to the police," I said in a calmness before returning to my task within the fortnight to come. Karen implemented what appeared to be a retaliatory measure. She complained to the HOA about the edge of my hedges, which had been neatly trimmed to regulation the color of my garden hose, which had been maintained neatly coiled when not in use, and even the bird feeder in my backyard, for asserting that it attracted rodents. Although there had been no basis for this complaint, each complaint was investigated and resolved, but each search consumed time and attention. Meanwhile, I was outwardly calm as I implemented my strategy. I read HOA bylaws until I could recite relevant sections from memory. I copied and highlighted specific clauses addressing property respect, noise ordinances, and complaint processes. My files continued with extremely meticulous attention to detail, dates, times, photos, and notes of each episode. During this time, I had an unexpected visit from the Thompsons, who lived 3 houses down on the opposite side. Monica Thompson, who is a retired school principal, looked uncomfortable standing on my front porch. "We merely wanted to inform you that we are with you," she said quietly. "Karen has been causing problems for some families on the block." A month ago, she complained Jason's basketball hoop as a visual blight, although it has remained there for 5 years with no complaints to her husband Edward, who concurred. She tried to get our grandson's graduation party shut down for noise complaints at 7 p.m. on a Saturday. Their visit was preceded by one from the Garkis, whose property bordered onto Karen's yard. They had the same stories of entitlement and harassment. The way she treated my landscaper was unacceptable. Maria Garcia confided she treated him like a servant who had strayed onto her estate in error. Within days, a quiet coalition had been formed, neighbors united by their shared experiences with Karen's era of privilege. We began to collate our evidence and exchange timelines of things. What Karen had not realized was that by attempting to isolate me, she had actually constructed a community stronger than ever before. By mid-November, our coalition group had compiled a comprehensive dossier outlining Karen's violations. My initial folder had evolved into a neat binder containing tabbed dividers, noise ordinance violations, encroachment on property harassment incidents, false claims and witness statements. All of them were meticulously dated with corroborative evidence, attached photographs, video clips, and signed depositions by concerned neighbors. With this evidence in hand, I requested a formal hearing before the whole HOA board, rather than negotiating with representatives who had earlier dismissed my worries. The meeting was to be held on a Tuesday evening at the community center, a rarely used room typically reserved for annual budget hearings and special elections. I arrived early dressed in a professional suit. My evidence binder under my arm board members filtered in, greeting me with questioning glances. Karen arrived last, striding in wearing an expression of mild annoyance, as if the meeting was a bother, disruption to her precious schedule. The HOA president, Mr. Harrington, acknowledged the meeting to order. "We are here today to listen to a formal grievance filed by Robert Anderson against a number of alleged infractions on the part of Karen Westfield. Mr. Anderson, you are welcome to present your side for the next 20 minutes. I methodically laid out the history of infractions, maintaining a professional demeanor, devoid of personal feelings or emotive language. I made video car obstructing my driveway dated photos of property encroachment and audio recordings of excessive noise offenses beyond the decibel levels set forth in our bylaws. In addition, I went on, Miss Westfield has filed a number of complaints against neighbors that were determined to be meritless, wasting HOA funds and creating community stress. I made photocopies of the falsified complaints, along with the official HOA dismissal letters. The board members' reactions shocked during my presentation. From polite curiosity to audible upset, as the scope of the taped violations was revealed. When I showed the security tape of Karen telling her valet to steal my driveway while obviously instructing him, the neighbor won't mind we have an arrangement. Several board members glanced at one another when my presentation was complete. Karen was invited to respond. Her typical confidence did appear somewhat broken, but she regained her poise. This is clearly a vendetta. She began talking in the practiced indignation of someone who has had to learn to deflect blame. Robert has been hostile since I leased here, judging me at every turn. Yes, there have been some parking miscommunications, but nothing that warrants this level of obsession. She waved contemptuously at my evidence binder. The noise complaints are exaggerated, and the accusation that I instructed anyone to park on his property is flat out false. At this point, Monica Thompson held up her hand to be heard. I would like to confirm that we have had issues of the same with Ms. Westfield. Her guests consistently block the path to our mailbox, and noise from parties at her house have disturbed our family numerous times. One by one, other neighbors gave supporting testimony. Karen's expression stiffened with every testimony, her eyes scanning the room for supporters who didn't show up. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat in light of the extensive reports and supporting testimonies. The board must decide on an appropriate response. We will deliberate in camera and make our ruling. By the end of the week, 3 days later, formal HOA notices were handed out all over the neighborhood. The board's ruling was unambiguous. Karen was getting fined $2,500 for a number of bylaw violations, with a written admonishment that other infractions would result in additional penalties or lawsuits. The HOA also imposed stricter new parking policies on the whole community rules that would be enforced by routine security patrols at nights and weekends. Karen's response was immediate and predictable. The next Friday, she attempted to host a second party, possibly believing the HOA decision was mere paperwork. And without enforcement clout by 10 p.m., her home was full of partygoers' music again, in excess of legal limits this time. However, an HOA security guard stopped by her door with a police officer to discuss the noise infraction. The party was ended prior to midnight the following morning. I received a note affixed to my front door. The writing pointed and mean enough to have torn the paper in a few areas. Congratulations on your tiny victory. Only cowards hide behind rules and paperwork and avoid confronting people face to face. You've made an enemy who knows human beings. You can't even imagine this neighborhood being all right until you decided to become its tyrant. Sleep soundly, knowing what you've unleashed. I discreetly removed the note, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and placed it in my evidence binder. Karen had just provided me with another weapon to use in what she did not know would be her last battle in our neighborhood. The menacing note meant more than angry words. It confirmed what my attorney had suggested could be reasonable cause for a suit of harassment in small claims court with the help of Patricia Lawson. I compiled the papers required for a small claims action against Karen for trespassing, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. When Karen was served the court summons, her outburst echoed throughout the neighborhood. She called for an impromptu gathering of choice neighbors, those few with whom she still had social connections, to taunt what she called my pathetic legal tantrum. Small claims court she allegedly made over cocktails on her patio over parking disagreements. This will be thrown out so fast, his head will be spinning. The judge will laugh him out of the courtroom. Her confidence was externally unrocked, but her behavior suggested growing unease. Security cameras caught her scouting out my property lines. Late one evening, taking measurements from the street to my driveway with a tape measure, she talked to someone who appeared to be her own attorney, gesturing repeatedly toward my house. In their conversation on the front lawn of her house, the court date was on a cold December morning. I had worked hard meticulously, ordering my evidence in chronological fashion and rehearsing my testimony so that it would be factual and unemotional. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, wearing business attire, rather than a court hearing her attorney whispering in her ear. As they sat down, the judge, a middle-aged woman with sensible reading glasses and no-nonsense attitude, read over the case file before speaking to us. This seems to be a neighborhood disagreement that has blown out of proportion. Let me make one thing clear from the beginning. This court is serious about property rights and harassment allegations, no matter what the dollar amount is involved. Mr. Anderson, please proceed with your case. I walked up to the evidence table with steady resolve during the next 40 minutes. I detailed the pattern of behavior, the level of the violations that are growing the police incident due to mistaken accusations, and finally the intimidating note left on my doorstep. I displayed videotape pictures, the police report witness statements from neighbors, and the HOA's formal report. Your Honor, I outlined that this case is not a series of little inconveniences or simple miscommunications. It illustrates a pattern of willful disregard of boundaries, followed by diligent harassment, when trespasses thereof were complained about the emotional damage created by such pursuits. Has had repercussions on my level of security at home and work due to anxiety and insomnia. Karen's attorney attempted to construe the event as a harmless neighborhood feud, overblown from reasonable into proportion by hypersensitivity. My client is a good neighbor citizen who only tried to create an amicable social climate. He argued any parking issues were innocently error-prone behavior by visitors and not aimed actions by Ms. Westfield. The letter, while perhaps passionate in tone, does not contain any overt threats and was written on the spur of the moment after being unfairly targeted by the HOA. The judge heard carefully before inquiring Karen directly. "M. Westfield, did you instruct your hired valet service to use Mr. Anderson's driveway for your October event?" Karen shifted in her seat. "I suggested that they could use some extra space if needed. I did not particularly point to his driveway. I created the security footage with voice of her orders to the valet." The judge watched the video twice, her face becoming increasingly stern. "Mrs. Westfield," she said, "after second time watching this video clearly shows you telling the valet to enter on Mr. Anderson's statement. Specifically telling the valet you had an agreement, which Mr. Anderson confirms, and your actions prove did not exist. Do you wish to rephrase your claim to this court?" Karen's composure finally snapped. It was one celebration he has been documenting my every move, as if some stalker with obsessions asked everyone in the area who the real issue was. Then Monica and Edward Thompson were subpoenaed as witnesses. Their testimony regarding Karen's conduct towards a number of neighbors was deadly to her cause. Maria Garcia then testified in her own experience, presenting additional evidence of harassment that coincided with my experiences. After all the testimony, the judge deliberated only 15 minutes before making her decision. The ruling was absolute. Karen was held liable for trespassing, harassment, and emotional distress. She was also ordered to pay $7,500 in damages and court fees. Also, the judge issued a restraining order to keep Karen from my property, with the only exception being unavoidable access to her residence. "Let me make this extremely clear," the judge added, staring directly at Karen. "This court finds your actions to be intentional and your testimony untruthful in nature. Any breach of this order will have serious consequences since we had exited the courthouse." Karen avoided eye contact, hurrying to her car without the assertive stride which had characterized her movements for months. The local grapevine saw to it that news of the judgment circulated rapidly by evening. The story had been posted in the community Facebook group, complete with references to the court case number for anyone who wished to verify the verdict. Karen's well-crafted image as a sophisticated social leader had been publicly stripped away, replaced by the bitter truth of her behavior. Her final social invitations withered away community members who had long tolerated her excesses, now kept their distance, not wanting to be associated with someone officially declared a harasser by the courts. January brought heavy snow and a visible lack of activity at Karen's house. The driveway still remained unplowed for days after each snowfall, and her typically illuminated porch was dark. Most evenings, neighborhood children built snowmen in their front yards without fear of being reported for ugly seasonal decorations, a complaint Karen herself had lodged against the Johnson Snowman clan the previous winter. In late January, a real estate agent sign appeared in Karen's front yard. No official word given, no farewell parties thrown. There was merely a for sale notice one day, where her garden flag of decorations had once said, "Life of the party lives here." The notice had described the home as an ideal party house with improved soundproofing, ironically modifications she had been compelled to make. After the HOA noise violations, the price had appeared optimistic in today's economy. But I guessed Karen couldn't tolerate considered selling for under what she paid for the property only a year before open houses attracted curious neighbors, more interested in viewing inside her house than in buying it. Monica Thompson called back to say that Karen had already removed most of the personal items from the house, leaving behind staged furniture that gave an impersonal showroom atmosphere. "Even the artwork is generic now," she puffed across the fence line. "Nothing at all like those abstract works she used to claim." 3 weeks later, a rider pending sale was posted on the sign by mid-February. Moving vans rolled by, not to deliver Karen's items to a new owner, but to remove the staging furniture before closing. Karen made just one brief appearance in person in the final walkthrough, with the couple who were buying them, a middle-aged couple with teen children, who had actually expressed explicitly that they wanted a quiet neighborhood while staying. The day after closing, I received an unexpected email from Patricia Lawson. Karen paid the court order damages in full. The message notified me with no further legal fights. The issue was now officially closed. I was in my kitchen, standing with my eyes on the screen, feeling an odd combination of vindication and hollowness. The battle which had taken so much of my time throughout the last year had ended not in some ultimate showdown, but in a screen message and a payment into my bank that weekend, with spring luring its start with melting snow and peeping crocuses. I decided it was time to rebuild our community spirit. I sent invitations out to the neighbors who had been with me, the Thompsons, the Garkas, the Johnsons, Mrs. Jenkins and others, for a wee Saturday afternoon barbecue, no dress code, no valet required. The invitation teased the party was all. Karen's extravaganzas had not been comfortable, genuinely friendly and considerate of community quiet hours. Children played basketball in my driveway, now cleared of unauthorized cars, while adults spoke on the patio. No shouting was necessary to hear one another above music. That was too much. I never really said thank you, Mrs. Jenkins, aside from a serving dish of grilled vegetables. Before you stood up to her, I had been considering selling my house. The incessant din was exacerbating my migraines. Likewise, feelings echoed all afternoon. Neighbors traded stories of relief, of feeling like they had reclaimed their community. Mr. Garcia revealed the HOA had instituted new procedures for resolving complaints requiring more verifiable evidence. Before launching investigations, a direct outcome of the trend uncovered by Karen's case. You know what the ironic thing is? Monica Thompson stated as the meeting concluded. She moved here in order to be the center of attention. The neighborhood queen bee. She could have done that out of kindness and thoughtfulness. Individuals would simply have been attracted to genuine warmth. That evening, after the final guest had departed, I walked along our street at the serene twilight houses, sent warm light from within homes, seen through windows as they maintained their evening routines. I stood for an instant before Karen's former residence, now occupied by the Petersons, who had already spoken to everybody on the block and asked politely about community standards. There I stood, I felt no lingering resentment towards Karen. The victory had not been in punishing her, but in defending something valuable, a community where respect formed the foundation of neighborly relations. Through her poor example, she had, unbeknownst to her, strengthened those ties, bringing people together, who otherwise might have remained acquaintances, neighbors. As I walked towards home, Mr. Peterson was struggling to drive his vehicle into his drive, carefully dodging a bicycle his son had left against the entrance. He waved when he saw me watching. "Still getting used to the angles," he yelled gleefully. "Hope we are not inconveniencing you with all our moving trouble." "Not at all," I replied with a warm smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood. If you need something, just call me." Walking the last steps to my front door, I felt a profound sense of peace. The driveway that had been a battleground now stood for something different. A boundary honored a community renewed, and a personal reminder that standing firm for what is right, even in things that feel insignificant, makes waves that ripple far beyond hard edges.